Bleach is the best shonen manga of all time, and yes, I am biased. I'm not even going to try and argue against that. But I'm also not going to try and make any other caveats like it's the best, but there's this, and I don't really like that. No, I just genuinely think Bleach is the best shonen manga that I've ever read. It does almost every single thing that I've wanted to see in a battle shonen specifically, and despite any shortcomings it does have, the pros definitely outweigh the cons by a lot. But let's back up, let's head back to that I'm biased part. This really just has to do with when I watched Bleach, whenever I first started getting into it, especially when it comes to manga, because it was also the first manga I read realizing that manga was manga. I mean, I still have a bunch of really old Dragon Ball stuff that I will never throw away just because it's actually really cool to keep. But in terms of just reading manga, especially through scans online, Bleach definitely, it's my first experience ever. But specifically focusing on the anime aspect, I watched Naruto first and then I headed on to Bleach. So it wasn't my first, but it's one of the first two. And tying into that whole nostalgia thing is the collecting aspect, because I've been collecting Bleach for a really long time. I remember whenever I used to just have volume 1 and 2, and now I have all 3 box sets, the Bleach Jet art book, Burn the Witch, and now all 3 of the light novels, at least the really important ones. Now obviously everything I just said brings in a ton of nostalgia, and I am 100% biased because of that. But that does directly lead into my next point. Bleach is genuinely amazing, just ignoring the nostalgia elements, and I'll explain exactly why. And to start everything off, it's easiest to talk about Ichigo because everybody already talks about him as being the most relatable protagonist, comparing him obviously to Naruto and Luffy. And it's so easy to see why he'd be considered the more relatable one here, and a big part is the fact that he actually has a family. Naruto's parents got ran through by a nail, and Luffy's parents, well, I never got that far. But in a similar way to how Naruto's parents got made into a donut, so did Luffy's brother. So this really just leaves Ichigo with living siblings and parents, or at least one parent. His mother does happen to be 6 feet under, so he's at least batting 50%, compared to most shonen protagonists who don't really seem to have any active parents. Now of course there's plenty of other things to appreciate with Ichigo's character. I mean, he's academically gifted, more than that he actually cares about his grades. I definitely was not academically gifted, but I did kind of care. And I'm not gonna lie, after watching so much Dragon Ball growing up and then heading on to Naruto for my first real anime that I actually knew was an anime, heading into Bleach with Ichigo as the main character was refreshing just because he wasn't a dumbass. Now I can kind of speedrun the rest of the aspects that really make Ichigo interesting and just overall a pretty amazing protagonist. There's his style. He was one of the few main characters who was pretty cool. He wasn't wearing orange and black jumpsuits, so anything except for that is definitely a plus. Keeping in line with the whole cool aspect, he was drawn by Kubo, that's automatic bonus points. And then there's the numerous forms that he has throughout the entire series. Of all these shows I've watched, Ichigo has the best forms. It's really not even close. And this is going to surprise, I imagine, a good number of people. Some of the best moments, if not the best moments with Ichigo, are the more introspective moments. This is stuff like in the Fullbringer arc, basically the entire thing, how it's consistently breaking down Ichigo mentally rather than physically. That's what was so great about that arc, and why so many people still do defend it despite the wide amount of hate that arc gets. Stack that on some other amazing moments within Bleach, especially during the Deputy Soul Reaper arc, the Substitute Shinigami arc, whatever you want to call it, in his fight with Grand Fisher, where he actually does end up not winning, not even killing the dude who killed his mother. And when it comes to character writing, especially for the protagonist of the story, that's going to be one of the best moments you'll really experience in almost any shonen. And then we move on to the side characters, and this is definitely a huge highlight for Bleach, one of the most praised aspects even when it comes to the haters for the series. Because no matter how much people really want to hate Kubo for the way he writes his story, it's basically impossible to hate characters like Genryusai, Kenpachi, and of course Kisuke. And that's really all I need to say. Everybody that's really watched Bleach has praised the cast. They know how phenomenal it is. It's not something that's controversial even a little bit. I mean, think about how tragic it would be if these characters we grew to love so much got contained to one arc within the first portion of the story, and then it got completely cut off after that, really reducing these characters to background characters that don't really matter at all to the overall plot of the story. I mean, that would just be terrible. An aspect to Bleach that gets completely slept on is the long-term storytelling, and whenever it comes to the way that Kubo does tell his story, he gets a ton of flack for it. And while you can make your reaches about how the story is repetitive, something that I feel like can't really be argued is these little plot lines that Kubo sets up early on within the story of Bleach. Gin Ichimaru is one of the best examples of this. Of course, having finished the series, we know that Gin basically gave his life serving Aizen just to get a chance to kill him. And what's so satisfying about this is going further back in the series and seeing the little hints dropped here and there, kind of alluding to the fact that he might betray Aizen. It's something that whenever it did happen, it felt like a natural progression within the story and not so much like a retcon. I've already gone into pretty good detail in what I think the best parts of Bleach are and how some parts are definitely more slept on than others. And that's without talking about how good looking the art is, along with this significantly detailed world, and of course the just really badass power system. All of that really mixes together and creates the best shonen manga of all time. Now, I'm also not ignorant. I know Bleach has its shortcomings. Specifically, I wanted to focus on the friend group that Ichigo has. These are supposed to be the main characters of the series. Ichigo, Orihime, Chad, Uryu, Renji, Rukia, these guys are supposed to be like the straw hats of Bleach, but it just never panned out that way. These guys can't compete with their contemporaries in this specific aspect at all, not even against Team 7. Unless of course we look at the extended members and just focus on those two, but that's a completely different story. But that's another thing for me. What I just did is criticize Bleach, and it just seems like that's what people have been focused on with the series for the longest time. And what I really want to do is address these bad critiques of the series. Now there's Ichigo as a protagonist, and I've already talked about him and how genuinely amazing he is, so it really isn't that much of a surprise I have a problem with this critique. And to be 100% clear, I'm not arguing if you don't like Ichigo and you think he's boring, that you're wrong. Thinking Ichigo is a boring character is completely fine. I'm not going to try and argue against that one specifically, really. But where I start to see a problem is when people think that because Ichigo is more reactive, more simple maybe, and of course more grounded, that means he's a bad character. And the same goes for the people that think that Bleach is repetitive. And the funny part here is that the entire basis of this argument is focused on two arcs, Soul Society and Hueco Mundo. It's really hard to apply this argument to really any other arc. And admittedly, the Hueco Mundo arc follows the same story beats as the Soul Society arc. And this would actually validify the argument of Bleach being repetitive if that wasn't the entire point of the arc. I don't know if people just didn't pay attention to the ending of this, or pay attention to any of Aizen's monologues, but his goal was to divide the forces of the Gotie 13, and that's exactly what he did. And that's how Hueco Mundo ends, and after that we head right into fake Karakura Town, where none of the same story beats really from Soul Society are repeated right here. Now the icing on the cake here is whenever the Fullbringer arc starts, because this is where the entire way Bleach tells its story, the entire formula it's had up until now, gets completely abandoned. And guess what happens right here? People complain because Bleach went away from its formula. Now, I'm not going to argue on whether or not this arc is actually good. That's really not that important at all. My point is, isn't it ironic that when Bleach switches up its formula, people still find a way to hate? Now, I know I've been throwing shade at Naruto throughout this entire video really, but I'm going to switch things up real quick and talk about One Piece, because if you're a One Piece fan and you talk about a repetitive formula in a story, any story, especially Bleach, you're getting immediately ignored. Blocked on all forms of social media, your opinion does not matter. Now, don't get me wrong here, it's still a successful formula, and more than that, it's entertaining. But it's still 3 arcs that are basically the exact fucking same. And then there's the final thing I wanted to talk about. Not really talk about, you'll see here in a second, but it's the art falling off. Now, like I said, I'm not going to say anything right here. Starting off, I'm going to put up a panel from the first arc of Bleach, and then I'm going to put a panel of the last arc of Bleach. That's the only point I needed to make. Look at it, there's your proof, we're done. And now to finish everything off, I'm biased and I'm out.